Witches, before we start this episode, I want to invite you. We're hosting a circle, a virtual circle. And if you'll be there with us, then you'll also be part of our Samhain special this year. We're inviting leading art witches, death witches, tech witches, activist witches, science witches. And I suspect that includes you, so come. You'll find info on our website and on Eventbrite. Just look for Missing Witches Samhain Circle. Look for the door into the unknown country. It's free. It's open to all. Come, come, come.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. Be a witch, 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 be a witch. You must be a witch.
This is the story of a woman, a child, walled away in a dilapidated monastery in the heart of the medieval Catholic Church, whose life and work triumphs this truth: that there are ways out even when you're trapped, that your body, no matter its condition, is a vessel of the living universe, singing through you and for you to sing with. You are of value all on your own, and you are also of a vast chorus, and there are infinite roots and roots to opening ourselves to the teeming lifeness of this life. Even when the combined kyriarchy that grasps at you and us all of patriarchy, capitalism, racism, misogyny has you cornered, there are tools at hand for carving out a margin of peace and emancipation and of power. This episode of Missing Witches is dedicated to prophet, mystic, visionary, healer, organizer, artist, composer, brewer, baker, writer, architect, maker, Hildegarde of Bingen. To our chorus of questions about the unknown or not yet understood electric, the dimension of mystery that is part of life in countless cultures and traditions, we add Hildegarde, a 12th century nun who saw the visions in her mind's eye all her life, and then, in middle age, when the average woman of the time would have been nearing a death by childbirth, illness, poverty, or violence, she spoke her truth out loud about the things Spirit told her, voiced the things that only she could hear, and stood tall and fierce, though racked with pain, shone even in the dark with what she called the living light, or in other contexts, the greenness. On May 10th, 2012, the Pope cast a spell of canonization, and Hildegard of Bingen was transformed into a saint of the Universal Church. Fiona Maddocks, whose book Hildegarde of Bingen, The Woman of Her Age, was totally my favorite reference in researching this piece, her wry feminist vision is a gift, writes, the Pope had quoted Hildegard in the context of the Roman Catholic Church's recent sex abuse scandal. In the vision of St. Hildegard, the face of the church is stained with dust. Her garment is torn by the sin of priests. The way she saw and expressed it is the way we have experienced it this year. He also noticed that her keen interest in the sciences was a natural extension of her spirituality, since in her eyes the entire creation is a symphony of the Holy Spirit. It was hardly surprising that Benedict, a German as well as an accomplished musician, would push for her official sanctity. He went a step further. On the 7th of October 2012, he made her a doctor of the church, a title given to those whose writings or teachings have had a particular impact. There being only 35 in total, Hildegard is an exclusive company. Others include Saints Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Catherine of Siena, and her own great ally, Bernard of Clairvaux. This proved one of the last major decisions in Benedict's pontificate. Today she is best known for her music, yet her compositions form only a small part of her story. She was a polymath, a visionary, a theologian, a preacher, an early scientist and physician, a prodigious letter writer who numbered kings, emperors, and popes among her correspondents. She was an artist not only in the musical and literary sense, but in painting and, it would seem, architecture. She even invented her own coded language. Her boldness, courage, and tenacity made her at once enthralling and haughty, intrepid and irksome. By contrast, the ills and terrors caused by, or perhaps even causing, her spectacular and overwhelming visions often rendered her helpless and torpid. So it was official. Hildegard, both the torpid and the bold, was officially a saint, and I don't really care about that, except that I love to see a woman of the 12th century, or any age, weave a magic so profound that she made a safe place. A place of power for herself and other women. And from that magic citadel, she expanded the identity and gender of spirit, wrote of the holiness of the green earth itself and our complete dependence on it, developed recipes for potions to deliver cures, even a recipe for happiness baked into a perfect little cookie. Composed music, was in fact the first recognized composer, influenced politics, and with her own body in the throes of chronic illness, became a portal between worlds that channeled prophecy and art and music and a brilliant bit of joy and safety for herself and other girls. But look, I don't embrace or feel good about all of Hildegarde's work. Fiona Maddocks makes clear that Hildegarde's ideas are not the progressive ideals we'd love to find in an astonishing woman writing and creating in the 12th century. Hildegarde says things about keeping the classes of people separate, and only takes girls of good family with money into her convent, strategically maybe building up their combined respectability and coffers and safety, and eventually opening a large convent for women of lower classes too, which she visits regularly, but still. She uses the trope of the poor, feeble woman extensively in her letters, and then she lays the voice of God on them with all her undeniable authority, and they generally cower before her. Interestingly, she doesn't waste as much time with the little old me stuff when writing to other women. She also used her voice and position to whip up passion for crusades. And you have to mourn and rage at the history of the crusades, of religious colonization by violence in any form, by anyone. The crusades demonized and murdered peaceful, quote-unquote, heretics, Jews and Muslims, and wired into Christian culture a way of weaponizing a peaceful premise, a kind of cult logic that is still used to twist minds toward hate and fear of other people, including queer and trans people today, and also to sell Amway and Mary Kay and countless other religion and capital entwined Ponzi schemes. Add this to the list of reasons why I broke from the church of my childhood. Religion as a justification for extortion, theft, and colonization. My family lived pieces of this. These are the roots and roots of control and predation that I felt twined invisibly around my mind and heart when Sunday service was my weekly rhythm, even when the message was one of revolutionary love. I had to cut those ties, though I think it's possible to rewire them from the inside for the purposes of healing and community and care. And if that's you, then more power to you. But for me, I think I'm done with religion for this reason. For the way I feel it working in my brain. As Donna Haraway writes, building on a quote from ethnographer of thinking practices Marilyn Strathern, it matters what ideas we use to think other ideas with. It matters what stories we tell to tell other stories with. It matters what knots knot knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds. What worlds make stories. I don't want to build worlds out of stories based on shame or control or violence or othering anymore. I don't want to benefit from extortion, threat, or theft. That's why I'm out here doing this, looking for stories I've been missing, and even for someone so deeply enshrined, intuned even, in the heart of the church. I hear an ancestor to missing witches in Hildegard sometimes. And those are the notes I want to follow and listen to and lift up for us to sing along with even here today. I love the living world. As science delves deeper into the potential in waves of chemistry and electricity all around us, mycelium networks and bacteria working to collaborate with us on environmental remediation and species health and macro and microbiome healing out here at the edge of the end of this world, and the perpetual, painful birth of the next, I find my way to new roots of love for Hildegard. Love for the work she put into understanding the delicate wisdom in the natural world, in leavening and fermentation and voices raised in song. Love for her authority and strength and for her resilience through chronic illness, and love for the greenness that pervades her work. She wrote, "Everything that is in the heavens, on earth, and under the earth, is penetrated with connectedness, penetrated with relatedness. With this and other lines reverberating from her with the wisdom of the witch, as above, so below, I want to make a case for Hildegard as witch ancestor, with her sisters in their long hair and tiaras, defying decades of rules that nuns should shave their heads and hide away, that they didn't own their lives in the first place, these girls given by their families along with their dowries as tithes to the church. I want to take their shiny tiaras and their hope and sisterhood and all the bits and pieces that I like a magpie, and weave them into my nest of what it means for me to be a witch. Because I like that word in the worlds it makes.
Ad break and
ad break, witches.
These ad breaks are sponsored by Missing Witches. We love you if you love us and you want to support us. There are lots of ways that you can do that. One of my personal favorites is our Patreon. There's always something going on the message board there, but specifically we do a monthly chat with those of our patrons who choose to join us. And it has been so rewarding for me, Risa. I think you can say the same thing.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Just come join us. You'll see. You'll just be like, oh, I knew when I started listening to this podcast that I found my witch best friends, and there must be like a badass gang of them out there gathering somewhere in the dark. And you were right. And it's on Patreon. And our Patreon is pay what you can. So it's not like there's a tiered system or whatever. If you can afford $1 a month or whatever else, we will welcome you with open arms. And yeah, our Patreon circles, we just learn from each other, and they're rad, and you should come.
Yeah. And another excellent and exciting and thrilling to even say out loud way that you can support us is by buying our book, Missing Witches.
Oh yeah.
You can get a paper copy if you're like me and you like to fuck a book up when you read it with a lot of
same.
I like to dog ear. I have like a sigil system that I use to annotate my books, but also like a lot of times it just has to be an ebook because I know I'm going to want to search things. Sometimes I like an ebook. Also, it's available as an audio book, which Risa and I narrated ourselves. There are musical versions of the carols. Those are two great ways you can support us, through Patreon, through buying our book. You can review our book on your podcast, on your blog, on your social media, on Goodreads, on Amazon. And if you really love this episode, you can tip us at PayPal, paypal.me/missingwitches.
I want us to start first with this image and keep it in our minds as we try to understand her. Hildegard was literally walled up in a monastery and had funeral rites read over her at 8. Or 12, we don't know for sure. She doesn't tell us much about this time, but she would argue against the practice of child oblates later on in life. She was under the tutelage of a 14-year-old named Jutta by the age of 8. And when Jutta decided, since she wasn't allowed to go on crusade, that she'd like to be an abbess, Hildegard's parents sent her as well. I feel sympathy for Jutta. She recognized something special in Hildegard, and she starved herself and wore a chain against her skin that dug into her flesh, all as part of her complicated relationship to a spirituality I don't understand. Hildegard didn't follow in her mentor's path of self-denial or self-harm. And I love that in a time when those attitudes were popularized by the church, especially for women, this isolated young visionary took a different path entirely, one that loved eating and drinking and being in the world. Hildegard was given by her wealthy parents to the church, a custom for 10th children that came with her dowry and her complicated, quiet pain. And even in this terror, this blatant echo of the brutal sacrifices of virgins in countless other cultures that used a god to justify ways of terrorizing and controlling women, she didn't die, and she didn't disappear. Her voice didn't drown. She was a seed. She created. Her voice came bursting out of her, and she got loud. She gathered women and wrote music and books, and had a voice within her that spoke with such complete spirit and confidence that the Pope recognized her prophecy as divine and granted her safety, which, though precarious in a time of papal schisms, hung on her like a magic cloak her whole life. Buried in the dark, she found a voice within her full of power, and she lived and thrived. But let's circle back again, because as you can tell, I attain great emotional heights reading Hildegard and reading about her. I feel her magic in me, but then I crash. She is beloved of contemporary Christians and New Age natural healers alike, and both of those systems of thought tend to trigger my knee-jerk, no thank you. I like atheism and science, though I talk to the trees and listen to the wind and write love notes to my house. I was raised in a beautiful version of the church, to be clear and fair. My social justice hippie Christian parents do it right as far as that's possible, I think. And I know many other practitioners who find in the Bible, in that life of that beautiful anarchist socialist Jesus, profound roots to healing and community building and to revolutionary magic. I see that for many, and I send love and feel their great love in return, gifted as they are at forgiveness. But for me today, religion just exhausts me and terrifies me and makes me angry. Even the beautiful, progressive, queer United Church ministers I bumped into in my Hildegard reading seem to come with a giant warning sign for me. I don't know. To me, religion, as it's been practiced, seems pervasively a history parallel to capitalism, a history of systems defined by emerging brutality, of often good, community-oriented ideas turning towards the protection and accumulation of the bits of power they manage to scrape together, which requires controlling the means of production and growth of the religion, which means controlling women's bodies and minds for procreation, and controlling men's bodies and minds as tools, sometimes for building, too often collapsing towards violence. I'm furious at every single storyline of every religion where the end result is identities and modes of joy erased and walled in shame. People in chains again. Children walled up and married off to Jesus in a crypt, and honestly, no wonder Hildegard says she was anxious every day of her life. Every single day. She had layers of good reasons for anxiety, not that you need reasons when it's coursing through your nervous system. The vision that came to her over and over again, and that she wrote and published and preached about publicly, behaviors that all already defied rules of how women were allowed to behave. The vision she saw was about the sickness in the church. Fiona Maddocks writes, as ever, her chief concern was to denounce the evil and felony sweeping through the church. Her principal target is not mankind, but in the clergy, who in her eyes neglected their duties and sought temporal power and wealth over and above spiritual humility. Hildegard was angry as hell at the church, at the clergy, but her whole safety relied on those institutions too. And her inspiration came from a voice she understood as God. And the things she'd read and been raised in, especially when she was alone with one other woman, a kid really, who was bent on self-flagellation in the name of God, shaped all her world and thoughts. She described her visions as seeing a reflection of the light most of the time, not the light itself. And I think that's a clue to how she and other visionaries shaped the pure inspiration they received into the language and context of their own life and time. Those are the thoughts she used to think other thoughts. But when it comes to using the language of the church to think my thoughts, let alone the language of war and violence, I want to be done. I love and am fascinated by the spectacular impulse to awe in the brain. And I don't want to see that impulse to awe manipulated, bent, and tortured into shapes, justifying endlessly duplicating misery and inequality here on earth. I don't know exactly where that leaves me. In debates in our house around atheism on one side and agnosticism and a sense that the earth and universe are profoundly alive in a vast way on the other, we land on this. Everything is sacred or nothing is. Everything is sacred and nothing is. It's our way of sitting in the crux of binary, at the spot where the poles of infinity meet, bowing to each other in a dance of double helix. We reject the brutality of division in sacred versus profane. As the BioArt Coven Manifesto goes, our dances gesture to the play between purity and dirt, getting in touch with embodied ways of knowing. There's no such thing as dirt, only not watching close enough. There's no such thing as purity, only not looking at the entire picture. Hildegard was deep in her context, but still I feel like she gets it, or at least brings wild new dimensions and complexity to the contemplation of the nature of the divine at the time, of the purity in the living dirt. And she grounds her vision of the sacred in the loving, pulsing light of all that lives and is. She wrote, "Love abounds in all things, excels from the depths to beyond the stars, is lovingly disposed to all things. She has given the King on high the kiss of peace." I know you heard that she in there and smiled, gentle listener. Not because we need to impose a boring binary to love or God when the nature of the living world is so much more infinitely vast, but because we know the context, the dominance of the patriarchy, the way the divinity of woman and of otherness was disappeared in order to be more effectively dominated. And Hildegard, sprouting with the voice of all that is God, etc., from her cell, resisted. In God Our Mother, the Feminine Cosmology of Julian of Norwich and Hildegarde of Bingen, Jennifer A. Hudson writes, Hildegard's cosmology exists beyond binarisms because her cosmic vision is cyclical and in this way is feminine, and reaches beyond structure and chaos in that it constantly negotiates the masculine with the feminine. In Hildegard of Bingen's vital contribution to the concept of woman, Abigail Favale writes, Hildegard's theology is intensely incarnational, and yeah, I love this, a theology in and of the body. Abigail continues, the material world is imbued with sacred significance and sacramental meaning. The human body is a microcosm of the cosmos, which Hildegard conceives as an ordered, harmonious whole. Her mystical vision of the universe is not a top-down hierarchy, but a cosmic egg with interconnected, nested layers, the earth at its heart. Hildegard's theology, following sacred scripture, emphatically affirms that both woman and man carry the Imago Dei, which endows each sex with equal dignity before God. My stepdad, Irish Catholic New Yorker, told me a story recently, I think as part of his ongoing gestures of support towards my work with missing witches. It was a story of having his mind cracked open by a Jesuit professor during his undergraduate studies at Notre Dame, a priest who argued passionately, with piles of theological support, the still contentious point that God is neither male nor female, and also is perfectly male and female, and there is no reason to privilege one gender over the other in how we speak of God, which my stepdad, skinny, tall, fiery as hell when he gets riled up, took as a challenge, and wrote his papers that year with God gendered female throughout, an act of defiance and exploration, and of discovery that stayed with him, and how he's viewed what we might call spirit, or the love in the universe, or the living light. Hudson continues, balance and interconnection are a major crux of Hildegard's cosmology. Balance and interconnection of masculine and feminine forces with humanity mirror the balance and interconnection within divinity and the cosmos. Moreover, Hildegard uses the feminine form in Latin, sapientia Dei, whenever she discusses Christ, which is similar to Julian of Norwich's use of God our Mother. It is not so much that God exists as a sexless entity for Hildegard, but rather as a balanced higher power that possesses a blend of masculine and feminine characteristics. These divine qualities are in turn mirrored within both sexes of the human family. And look, she may have seen divinity in the spectrum of the human family, but Hildegard was not a queer ally, and neither, clearly, is the church. But as angry as I get at the history of the church and the failings of family members, feminists, witches before me, I need to ground myself in love. I can't hate my own ancestors, though I rage at some of their choices and the systems they were cogs in, the classist, racist air they breathed. I want to polish the things that do shine and trace the fine lines of light across hundreds of years. to follow the web that has been there and strengthening all the time. The light of powerful creatrixes, spiders and fungi and theorists and poets and nuns. The rhythm of love beyond boundaries. Hildegard wrote, "We shall awaken from our dullness and rise vigorously toward justice. If we fall in love with creation deeper and deeper, we will respond to its endangerment with passion." And she wrote, "Gaze at the beauty of Earth's greenings. What delight God gives to humankind with all these things. All nature is at the disposal of humankind. We are to work with it, for without it, we cannot survive." I used to fight with my grandfather over this idea that nature was given to humans, that it's all for us. I still don't think that feels accurate. It feels more to me like life emerges in concert and we have a role to play in the ways that riotous noise can be a music. I have new thoughts on this since reading a piece by Lila June, Indigenous activist, musician, and educator, when she wrote, "We belong on the land. We belong in active participation with the land. Without our gentle, loving, and reciprocal touch, our clipping, burning, pruning, and manicuring, our mother falls apart. Just look at the pine beetles ripping through our national park forests. Just look at the catastrophic fires gobbling up lands where our light indigenous fires used to clear the light fuel load every single season for thousands of years. The earth needs us. Do you really think Creator would make humans without purpose? In the Yoruba language, they call humans the chosen ones because they were chosen to take care of and steward the land. This is why it aches so deeply to see our Mother Earth crumble all around us. To see Coyote destroy ancient systems. To see Coyote hijack our greed and fear to do so. Because deep down in the marrow of our bones, we know we were created to care for her. These big brains are not meant to maximize profits for the next fiscal quarter. They are here to leverage skill and precision in the upkeep of complex, biodiverse ecosystems. Time for us to relearn these practices again and do it together, as many hands make light work. This land was densely populated by indigenous communities and extensively managed because we had the people power and we had the scientific know-how. Some elders retain this knowledge, despite it being beaten out of us and even demonized by the boarding school and parochial school systems. Here we are, poised, ready to take it back again, take back our mantle and our role as earth stewards. Hildegard wrote, "The truly holy person welcomes all that is earthly." All this leaves me with one of my few remaining prayers. Please make me of service to the earth. Hildegard writes and crafts and cooks and sings and brews beer and makes wine in a time when fermentation isn't known or understood, and it's considered a divine act. God emerges in the bubbles when they choose. It had been women tending to these kitchen miracles until those crafts were gilded, and it was, surprise, illegal for women to join the guilds, and monks took over, with mostly unnamed women now assisting them. Hildegard writes and studies at this small opening of time, before the university system overtook the dominance of the abbeys and monasteries. Under the university system, women were excluded and dehumanized again more completely, pushed further out of circles of knowledge and power, working land they could never own, running industries they weren't allowed to profit from, murdered for having too much skill, too much voice, burned alive and called witch. It's in this context, this between time behind a wall, that she lets down her hair and begins to say the burning things she hears inside her own mind. This flourishes into recipes, like hundreds of them, dozens of utterly unique musical compositions written for the voices of her nuns, startling illustrations of the geometry of the universe, and remarkably accurate, for the 12th century, ideas about healing with plants. In a paper called "Are the Correct Herbal Claims by Hildegard von Bingen Only Lucky Strikes? A New Statistical Approach," a team of German and Swiss scientists focused on Hildegard's references to 85 specific plants, one still being used today for medical purposes. They found 212 health claims by Hildegard from this group of plants, 30 of them cross-referenced as correct in their claims according to contemporary standards. If she had been making the claims up randomly, only between 6 and 7 of her cures would have been accurate. The study finds the probability of this happening just by chance is 1 in 10 million. They conclude, the hypothesis that Hildegard could have achieved her correct claims by chance is to be clearly rejected on the basis of the highly significant level of our new statistical procedure. The finding from this approach that medieval medical claims are significantly correlated with modern herbal indications supports the importance of traditional medicinal systems as an empirical source. This kind of statistical approach, beginning from a baseline of she was guessing at random rather than she was reading everything available at the time, including new translations from other cultures' knowledge bases, and working in the monastery clinic and kitchen, and testing plants and combinations, and listening carefully to the women and men around her is useful, I guess. And it's also kind of insulting and limited, and just a taste of how indigenous knowledge has been treated for hundreds of years by capitalist and settler science. Patriarchy and industry combine to cut deep gashes in our understandings of the natural world still today. Forest ecologist Suzanne Simard, author of Finding the Mother Tree, said in an interview recently, "I was always on the outside because it was a man's world. Women weren't allowed into forestry until my generation. The whole perspective on forests was all from this one gendered perspective. It very much focused on competition and dominance." Later in the interview, she goes on to say, even Darwin understood collaboration, and now we know, after many decades, starting with Lynn Margulis, who came up with the endosymbiotic theory, that really evolution is a co-evolution. With the microbiome, we know that we're all this kind of consortium of species. But by the time the science got to that point, the practices in agriculture and forestry were really entrenched around trying to manage competition. I think of it as trying to see with only one eye. I think Hildegard was trying to see with more than one eye. Should we be surprised that one who showed such determination to communicate the secrets of the heavens should also want to reveal the workings of the earth, writes Fiona Maddocks. And she describes Hildegard's massive labor of love for the workings of the earth in this way. The Physica, consisting of 9 books listing almost 1,000 plants and animals in German, is a study of botany, zoology, stones, metals, and elements, describing their physical and medicinal properties. Causae et curae, as its title indicates, examines the causes and cures of diseases, relating them to what has been clumsily called an allegorical microcosmic physiology, and offering remedies mainly using plants. Hildegard includes details that would have to have come from her vast reading, but also from conversations with local midwives, farmers, and fisherfolk. Not all her knowledge came from first-hand experience. She includes, for example, the whale, listed as a fish rather than a mammal, with a hearty recommendation to eat the flesh as a panacea for most ills, from fevers and ague to scrofula, just as using a knife handle made from whalebone will cure a painful arm, and wearing shoes or a belt made from the skin will banish infirmities. In this way, her books are a compendium of oral and written and channeled knowledge. It doesn't all hold water today, but it's remarkable for the scale of the effort as much as for the combination of sources and insights. Some of the many bits that have been polished by contemporary writers and practitioners include her recipes for hoppy beers and happiness cookies, 2 potions of which I am particularly fond myself. As a recent piece in Atlas Obscura summarized, for a weak heart she proposes a daily teaspoon of wine for the heart consisting of boiled parsley, honey, and wine. For stomach pain, a nightcap of wine mixed with powdered ginger, galingale, a ginger relative from Southeast Asia, and zedoary, another ginger cousin from India. And for melancholy she offers her cookies of joy, or nerve cookies, wielding the key ingredients of spelt flour, nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves to calm all bitterness of the heart and mind, open your heart and impaired senses, and make your mind cheerful. Hildegard is also weirdly, delightfully beloved in hipster beer circles, and to be clear, I love hipster beer circles, because she's responsible for the earliest surviving writings on the use of hops in beer. As a result of its own bitterness, Hildegard wrote in the Physica, circa 1150, hops stops putrefaction, when put in beer, and it may be added so that it lasts much longer. Hops were in use by brewers before this mention, but Hildegard's writing is the first place we find reference to it. She was noticing the natural world and how it weaves with us through food and healing. Hildegard's opuses of music and drink and food and ecology come from the same place, the same wellspring of love for the world. She wrote underneath all the texts, all the sacred psalms and canticles, these watery varieties of sounds and silences, terrifying, mysterious, whirling and sometimes gestating and gentle, must somehow be felt in the pulse, ebb and flow of the music that sings in me. Her love of the world and her sense of the watery, terrifying, gestating and gentle sound of the world came from a particular experience of being in a body. From my early childhood, before my bones, nerves, and veins were fully strengthened, I have always seen this vision in my soul, even to the present time when I am more than 70 years old. In this vision, my soul, as God would have it, rises up high into the vault of heaven and into the changing sky and spreads itself out among different peoples, although they are far away from me in distant lands and places. And because I see them this way in my soul, I observe them in accord with the shifting of clouds and other created things. I do not hear them with my outward ears, nor do I perceive them by the thoughts of my own heart or by any combination of my 5 senses, but in my soul alone, while my outward eyes are open. So I have never fallen prey to ecstasy in the visions, but I see them wide awake, day and night. And I am constantly fettered by sickness and often in the grip of pain so intense that it threatens to kill me. But God has sustained me until now. There is a way that constant chronic pain transforms the texture of the world. If you've experienced it, it's recognizable in Hildegard's visions, and I think I know that. I mean, I can remember something like it, and when I think about it, it's always right there, creeping up my back, lighting up behind my left eyelid. I struggled for a long time wanting to talk about chronic pain and the mind, connections with others, the way it makes this weaving and dissolution of the self, but not knowing how. There's nothing more boring than a decade full of days with the same pain, and yet. Sometimes there would be a loss of vision. The lights would get all blurry on the left side. I could see auras and halos. I had a migraine for 10 years. It ebbed and flowed, but it never stopped, until strangely it melted away. Like Hildegard, I experienced the most common feature of migraine other than the headache, what Oliver Sacks describes as a shower of phosphenes in transit across the visual field, their transit being succeeded by a negative scotoma. Or as she puts it, a great star, most splendid and beautiful, and with it an exceeding multitude of following stars, which with the star followed southward, and suddenly they were all annihilated. She rides the pain. Sometimes she seems to use it, like the times when she's paralyzed until she gets her way, even when it's not involved in her fighting for what she sees is needed against massively more powerful adversaries. It fuels her vision of the kind of wisdom God wants us to find in the sparkling, joyful, laughing beauty of the world. Pain turns the colors of the world up to 11. Matthew Fox in the intro to Scivias writes, Hildegard does not lay out her theology of wisdom abstractly. It was won by her at the cost of great pain. Physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological, political. Often sick, often misunderstood, often put down by males of privilege in a church that was sexist. Hildegard knew what pain meant. She had tasted it. Her response included a mature anger, a moral outrage at what she called the multiple imperfections of the church. And a second response was a personal recycling of pain. One is able to be saved through the bitter price of pain. Pain isn't all grit-building visions and redemption. It also fragmented my focus so I couldn't properly plan or handle logistics. I don't think it made me a nicer person. I could do groceries or cook or dishes, not all three in a single day. Or I could go to work or school, and if you added interpersonal interactions of any kind of emotional complexity to that fragile pile, then the pain would come from where it always sat at the base of my neck. It would shoot out black arms around my waist so I couldn't breathe deeply for hours, sometimes causing blackouts. The house was a mess all the time, and we got behind on rent. Pain acts like hunger on the brain. We narrow to our snapping reptile selves. Pain stifles motivation. Hildegard wasn't a visionary just because of pain, but because she listened through it. She watched, and crucially, she dared to be exactly who she was, even though that brought her way off the edge of the known world to share a vision that had room for both pleasure and joy in a way that was completely challenging to the church and to patriarchy. Matthew Fox again. Wherever patriarchy in culture or in persons fails to teach the art of savoring and the joy of living, it is failing in instructing us in wisdom. The building of a house of wisdom in ourselves as individuals and in community with other humans and all other creatures of our earth is, for Hildegard, the essential task of personhood and citizenship. It is the setting up of the unfurled divine tent that exists in all creation and in every human being. Since it is the common task we are called to, this enterprise and none other is the source of community, the communio, the common task which will render us a whole, living, breathing, celebrating, forgiving, justice-making, compassionate, and wise people. This is why we were born. It is worth the struggle. Hildegard doesn't join in the struggle against patriarchy in all the ways my modern feminism wants her to, of course. She says some classically homophobic things even while writing of her profound love for her student, Richardis. Richardis died 2 years after leaving the abbey at the insistence of her brother and family, and she died wishing she had never left Hildegard's side. We can't know, but I think she loved this woman and a community of women. And I think she loved the earth and wine and beer and thought perfectly spiced cookies could light you up with joy. She wasn't radical in all the ways I would have wanted. She was classist, and her love for the church sounds like Stockholm Syndrome to me, and I don't blame her. Being walled up would have bent my brain. And as a witch, I would have used my fierce will to emerge in any way I could, trust me. And I think that's what Hildegard did. And I think she was wildly brave. She wrote, "Dare to declare who you are. It is not far from the shores of silence to the boundaries of speech. The path is not long, but the way is deep. You must not only walk there, you must be prepared to leap." I think she leapt and changed the world. I think she found the way to be an intellectual and a musician and a leader without getting burned alive. Hildegard walks a very fine line in a dangerous time to grasp a power for herself and for the living light of all that's green, and she makes it out alive. Hildegard said women shouldn't wear men's clothes and they shouldn't do men's work, and the rules for nuns made clear they shouldn't preach or travel. And yet in her 60s, she embarks on no less than 4 speaking tours. She leads and writes and tells the truth she sees, that the church is like a woman in danger at the hands of a rapacious man. An image only more painful and potent today. She is caught in the language and logic of the tools she had to think with, and she is illuminated by visions which exceed the grasp of that net. From the age of 3, she sees, when fully awake, glowing symbolic images which land with their meaning in her mind and give her insights about the time of Christ, the nature of the church, the world to come, and the right move for the women she leads and protects. She wrote, "It happened in the year 1141 of the incarnation of God's Son, Jesus Christ, when I was 42 years and 7 months old, that the heavens were opened and a fiery light of great brilliance came and suffused my whole brain and set my whole heart and breast afire like a flame, yet not burning but warming as the sun warms an object on which it sheds its rays. Suddenly I came to understand the meaning of the Book of Psalms, the Gospel, and the other canonical books of both the Old and New Testaments. Although I could not interpret the words of their text nor divide the syllables, and I had no knowledge of cases or tenses, yet in a marvelous way I had sensed the power and mystery of secret, wonderful visions in myself from girlhood, from the age of 5 even to the present time. Barbara Newman writes, Hildegard herself was aware that the visions had some connection with her delicate health and frequent sickness. At the end of her last book, On the Activity of God, she describes her temperament as airy, that is, prone to suffer infirmities caused by wind, air, and rain, so that she can by no means enjoy any security of the flesh. Yet she adds that otherwise the inspiration of the Holy Spirit would not be able to dwell in her, as if the Spirit were literally a wind to which she had been physically sensitized. The further I go with Hildegard, the further I want to go. I am in my 42nd year as I write this, and my feelings and words move through me in clear reflection of the light on the lake, as though the Spirit were the wind, or the wind were spirit enough. I spent a day up to my elbows in roots and soil in mycelium digging plastic out of my neighbor's stream, and came home and canceled an interview I had lined up for a very high-paying, stupid job. I don't know where I'm going these days, but I'm trying to listen. I spent years in the grip of migraine until I learned to move in collaboration with my muscles, bones, nerves, and mind, not trying desperately always to control and protect them. My mind finally moved out of my neck and into the air around me, the space I take up with all my gestures, all my dances, with faith in the way that I can float out of a chair. I started to say exactly what I wanted to say in my writing. It comes out in fits and starts. It came out first in network maps and papers spread across the floor, and getting up to write down the things that suddenly sounded clearly in the night. It did not come from visions, although I think I had one once. I asked it to go away, and it obliged. I cried and apologized to the empty air that was left after, and I never talked about it. But I walked in the windstorm of life toward the work of opening myself, telling the stories and calling out the questions I saw with all the honesty I could, and that was the deal I think I wrought with the vision shown to me by my mind, or by whatever you believe in. An emergence from the vast network of ideas and experiences intersecting with the vast network of beings that cohabitate with me in the air and the rain, and memories and ideas of our ancestors and of all species. A deal I think we all make. The task of finding what will suffice, as Wallace Stevens puts it. Scrambling to find what would suffice, I came closer and closer to making the leap across the void. My singing voice would crack loose shortly thereafter, and it was all a part of it, of walking out of migraine and into being this utterly strange and perfectly familiar self to myself. Hildegard wrote, "We cannot live in a world that is not our own, in a world that is interpreted for us by others. An interpreted world is not a home. Part of the terror is to take back our own listening, to use our own voice, to see our own light. Don't stop singing." Witches, or whatever you call yourself, O person imbued with the electricity of unique thought, brought to your knees by awe, blessed with pleasure and joy and sadness and anger in your own ways of feeling and healing, and being rooted in this world which holds and owns us, hear her calling to you across the centuries. Don't stop singing. Hear it as a song, the chant of women told they were poison, dangerous, less than, witches raising their voices and knowing they are of beauty. Hear it in the song that courses through all things and calls life forth from mother cultures into sacred ancient sakes and our daily bread. Take back your own listening. Dare to declare who you are. Call yourself what you like. Love and honor what you can from your ancestors far and wide and deep in the soil beneath us. Cross the shores of silence when it's time to sing out in praise, or to mourn, or to rage and right a wrong. Grow your hair long. Give yourself a tiara of self-love. Build a world of protection for the vulnerable as best you can, even if that vulnerable one you protect right now is you strange and familiar being you. For witches writing to us or bringing up the question about coming out of the broom closet in our coven conversations, perhaps imagine this. There is no closet. There are only circles of protection. All the places we have hid have been a shelter and a home. Even our own shame has been an act of love outstretched by our shadow selves, trying to understand what we need in response to the shaming world, trying to keep us safe as best she can. Thinking of the key, we confirm the prison, as Eliot wrote. It matters what thoughts we use to think other thoughts. So choose your keys and tools and songs. Map your circles of protection and give them new names. And give yourself the grace to choose how you enter and exit and use them day to day, context by context. If you are walled within an abbey or trapped within chronic pain, mental illness, or the infuriating mire of inequality, remember to breathe in the unseen ancestors, and with them begin to chant or dance or chart against the insides of your eyelids the vastness of your own mind and the dancing spheres of your own breath. See the brilliance of your imagination and your interaction with the unseen world, the living light, the greenness. Take back your own listening and hear this 12th century saint calling to you with love, and all us witches calling too. Don't stop singing. Dare to declare who you are. We are here in the circle the darkness makes between our ears, listening and singing with you.
You must be a witch.